The world, for Eris Thorne, was never quiet. Even in the deepest silence of the night, his mind was a bustling, noisy city. It was a cruel joke, he often thought. His entire life was built around sound. He was a doctor of sound, not the medical kind, but the kind that understood how a gentle wave of music could make a person cry, or how the sharp blast of a horn could make them jump in fear. He worked in a studio filled with expensive microphones and complicated software, helping filmmakers create the perfect soundscape for their stories. He could make a door creak sound terrifying, or a summer breeze sound like a memory of childhood. He was a master of sound for everyone, except himself. When night fell, Eris's expertise became his curse. The very skills that made him brilliant at his job, his ability to pick apart layers of noise to focus on the tiniest detail of a sound, turned against him. The gentle hum of the refrigerator in his kitchen wasn't just a hum. It was a low, droning orchestra of vibrating metal and struggling electricity. The distant whoosh of a car on the wet street wasn't just background noise. It was a rhythmic, annoying sweep that he waited for again and again. The soft ticking of the clock in his hallway was a tiny, persistent hammer, hitting a nail inside his brain. Sleep was a distant country he could no longer visit. He would lie in his bed in the dark, his body tired and heavy, but his mind was wide awake, alert, and screamingly loud. It was like being a prisoner in a cell where the walls were made of sound. He called it his white noise prison. The more he tried to ignore the sounds, the louder they became. The more he craved silence, the more his own thoughts would rush in to fill the void. Worries about work, replaying awkward conversations from years ago, making endless to-do lists for the next day. He had tried everything. He spent a small fortune on a mattress that was supposed to feel like a cloud. He bought a heavy blanket that promised to squeeze the anxiety out of him. He tried listening to gentle rainforest sounds, but his brain would just focus on one specific bird chirp, over and over, until it drove him mad. He tried the sound of ocean waves, but then he would start thinking about the tide and the moon, and the vastness of the sea, which only made him feel more awake and small. White noise machines, which produced a static-like shh sound, were the worst. To Eris, it wasn't a calming blanket of sound. It was the sound of a broken television, a chaotic mess of every frequency at once. It was the audio version of staring at static on a screen. One particularly bad night, Eris gave up. He kicked off the heavy blanket and sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He felt a deep, hollow exhaustion that was more than just being tired. It was a feeling of defeat. He looked at the clock. It was 3:17 a.m. The city outside his window was at its quietest, but to him, it was still a symphony of irritation. He walked out of his bedroom and into his small living room, which also served as his personal studio. The glow of his computer monitor was the only light. He sank into his comfortable chair, the one he spent hours in while working. He felt a strange sense of comfort here, surrounded by his tools even in the middle of the night. Out of habit, he clicked the mouse and the screen lit up. He opened his internet browser. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe a new magical sleep solution he hadn't heard of, but he was too tired for hope. Instead, his fingers drifted to a bookmark he had saved long ago, a public website from NASA, where they shared raw data from their space missions. He wasn't a space expert, but he was a data and sound expert, and he sometimes visited the site looking for unusual, non-musical sounds to use in his work. The rumble of a Martian wind, the crackle of Jupiter's magnetic field. He scrolled aimlessly. His eyes were scratchy and dry. He clicked on a mission named Messenger. It was a probe that had flown to Mercury, the planet closest to the sun. The page was filled with graphs and numbers. There were no sounds here, just data. Measurements of magnetic fields, counts of tiny particles, readings of the solar wind, the constant stream of energy and particles blowing from the sun. Eris stared at the numbers. They were just information, cold and impersonal. But then an idea, fragile and half-formed, flickered in his tired mind. Sonification. It was a process he used sometimes in his work. It meant turning data that wasn't sound into sound. You could take a graph of temperature changes over a year and assign a musical note to each temperature. When you played it, you'd get a strange melody of the weather. He had once turned the population growth of a city into a symphony of rising strings. What if, he whispered to the silent room, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep, what if the solar wind has a sound? It was a silly thought. In space, there is no air, so there is no sound as we know it. It is the ultimate silence. But this data, these numbers representing the invisible push and pull of the sun's energy against a tiny hot planet, what would that feel like as a sound? It was 3:45 a.m. He had nothing to lose. With the slow, deliberate movements of someone who is very tired, he started to write a simple computer program. He told the computer, "Take this number for magnetic field strength and make it the volume. Take this number for particle density and make it the pitch." He wasn't trying to create music. He was just building a bridge, a translator, between the language of science and the language of the ear. It took him an hour. The sun was starting to think about rising, casting a faint gray light through the window. Finally, he was ready. He had a small audio file. He expected it to be a mess. He expected harsh digital screeching, a chaotic noise worse than any white noise machine. He imagined it would be the sound of static from the void of space itself. He took a deep breath, put on his professional studio headphones, the ones that could hear every detail with perfect clarity, and clicked play. What came through the headphones was not a screech. It was not static, it was a deep, slow, whooshing sound. It was low and resonant, like the earth taking a long, slow breath. Beneath the whoosh was a soft, shimmering layer, like a million tiny grains of sand gently tumbling over each other in slow motion. It had a rhythm, but not a beat you could tap your foot to. It was a rhythm of waves on a shore you've never visited. A rhythm of something vast and powerful, yet incredibly gentle. It was empty, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of a strange, peaceful energy. Eris sat perfectly still. His eyes, which had been burning with fatigue, were now wide open. He wasn't analyzing the sound. He wasn't picking it apart. For the first time in years, his busy, noisy brain had nothing to say. The sound was so foreign, so completely unlike anything from Earth that his mind had no reference for it. There was no memory attached to it, no association, no hidden meaning. It was just a presence, a cosmic sigh. He listened for 5 full minutes, not moving a muscle. The sound washed over him, through him. It didn't block out the other noises. It simply made them feel small and unimportant. The fridge's hum was now just a tiny buzz next to this cosmic breath. The ticking clock was a faint click in a vast, quiet universe. A feeling, one he had almost forgotten, began to creep into his body. It was a heavy, warm feeling, starting in his shoulders and moving down his spine. It was relaxation. True, deep relaxation. He was exhausted. He saved the audio file, named it Solar Wind Test, and stumbled back to his bed. He didn't have the energy to hope. He just lay down, the strange, soothing sound still echoing in his mind. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the prison of white noise had no walls. There was only a dark, quiet, welcoming space. And before he could even think about it, Eris Thorne fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Eris woke up, and for the first few seconds he didn't understand what was different. He was lying in his bed in his room. The morning light was filtering through the blinds. Then it hit him. He had been asleep. Not a light, broken doze, but a deep, heavy, uninterrupted sleep. He felt a physical sensation he had almost forgotten. His body felt rested. His mind felt clear, not foggy and bruised. He sat up slowly, almost afraid that the feeling would shatter like glass. He looked at the clock. It was 8:14 a.m. He had been asleep for almost 4 hours straight. For him, that was a miracle. The memory of the previous night came back to him in a rush. The frustration, the hopelessness, the desperate experiment with the NASA data, the sound, it hadn't been a dream. The deep, resonant whoosh, the shimmering static underneath, it was still echoing faintly in his memory, like a seashell held to the ear after a day at the beach. It had been real. He practically leaped out of bed, a sudden nervous energy filling him. He hurried into his living room, his heart beating a little faster. His computer was still on, the screen showing the simple program he had written and the audio file named Solar Wind Test. He half expected it to have been a fluke, a trick his tired mind had played on him. With a trembling hand, he put his headphones back on and clicked the play button. There it was again. It wasn't beautiful in a traditional way. It wasn't a lovely melody or a calming piano piece. It was something else. It was a texture, a feeling. It was the sound of immense emptiness, but an emptiness that felt peaceful, not lonely. It was the sound of a vast, dark ocean with slow, gentle waves that had no beginning and no end. It was the solar wind, a stream of a billion particles washing over a tiny hot planet, and he, Eris Thorne, was somehow listening to it. He listened for a long time, just sitting in his chair, his eyes closed. He didn't try to analyze it. He just let it happen. And again, he felt that same calming effect. The tight knot of anxiety that usually lived in his chest first thing in the morning was just looser. A thought, wild and hopeful, sparked in his mind. Was it a coincidence? Maybe he was just so exhausted that he would have fallen asleep to anything. Maybe it was a one-time thing. He knew he couldn't trust just one night. He was a scientist of sound, after all. He needed more data. He needed to test it. That day at work was different. He was working on the sound design for a tense car chase scene, a job that usually required all his focus. But today, his mind kept drifting back to the sound from Mercury. He found himself humming the low, droning tone under his breath. His colleague Lena noticed. "You seem good today," she said, leaning against his studio door. "You got some sleep?" Eris hesitated. He felt a little silly explaining it. Yeah, actually I did. I tried something new." "Oh yeah? Another magic pillow?" she teased. "Something like that," he said with a small smile, deciding to keep his cosmic discovery to himself for now. The real test would come that night. As evening fell, the old familiar dread began to creep back in. What if it didn't work again? What if last night was just luck? The hope he was feeling was terrifying because it made the possibility of failure so much worse. He went through his normal nighttime routine, his nerves on edge. He brushed his teeth, changed into his pajamas, and turned off the big lights, leaving only a small lamp on. It was time. He sat on the edge of his bed, headphones in hand. He took a deep breath like a diver about to plunge into deep water. He selected the solar wind test file and pressed play. The sound filled his head. The deep whoosh, the gentle static. For a moment, nothing happened. His mind, trained for years to fight sleep, tried to resist. It threw up its usual distractions. Did I remember to send that email? What was that noise outside? Is the sound changing? Am I focusing on it too much? But the sound from Mercury was relentless in its consistency. It didn't change. It didn't have a pattern his brain could latch onto and worry to death. It was just a constant, gentle pressure. It was like his thoughts were small, nervous birds, and the sound was a wide open sky they couldn't find a perch in. One by one, the thoughts just drifted away. He felt his body begin to relax. The tension in his shoulders melted. His breathing, which he hadn't even realized was shallow, became slow and deep, matching the slow, rhythmic pulse of the cosmic noise. The annoying hum of the fridge faded into the background, becoming just another insignificant layer in the vast soundscape. He didn't remember lying down. He didn't remember pulling the covers up. One moment he was sitting, listening, and the next he was waking up. It was morning. Bright, proper morning light was streaming into the room. He had slept through the entire night. Not just 4 hours. 7 full, deep, glorious hours of sleep. A feeling exploded in his chest that was so powerful it was almost overwhelming. It was a mix of pure joy, profound relief, and a dizzying sense of discovery. This was not a coincidence. This was real. He got out of bed, his body feeling light and strong. He felt like he could run a marathon. He felt like he could solve any problem. This must be what normal people feel like every day, he thought. He walked into his living room and looked at the computer screen with a new kind of reverence. That simple audio file wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was a key. It had unlocked a door he thought was permanently sealed. He sat down, not with desperation like the night before, but with a focused, burning curiosity. He opened the NASA website again and looked at the data from the Messenger probe. Those numbers, those dry, boring columns of information, were hiding a secret. They were a recipe for peace. A lullaby written by the universe itself. He thought about the sheer scale of it. The solar wind traveled for millions of miles. It was a storm of raw energy from the sun. When it hit Mercury, a planet with almost no atmosphere, it created this gentle sigh. The most violent forces in our solar system were conspiring to create the most calming sound he had ever heard. The irony was beautiful. He knew the sound he had was crude. It was a first draft, a quick translation. He had just used the most basic data. What if he could make it better? What if he could find other data sets, the magnetic field fluctuations, the different types of particles, and layer them in? He could create a richer, deeper, even more effective sound. A new purpose settled over him, washing away the last remnants of his fatigue. He wasn't just a man trying to fix his sleep anymore. He was an explorer. He had stumbled upon a hidden continent on a map everyone thought was fully drawn. He had found a whisper from the void, and it had spoken a word of profound peace. He opened his software, his fingers flying across the keyboard with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He had a mission. He was going to listen to the solar system, and he was going to learn how to sleep. The energy that filled Eris now was different. It wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of a man searching for a solution. It was the calm, powerful focus of a man who had found a path. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting against his insomnia. He was working with a purpose that felt bigger than himself. He spent the entire day in a state of deep concentration. He called his studio and told Lena he was working from home on a special project. He didn't elaborate, and she, knowing his sometimes intense focus, just wished him luck. His living room, usually a place for relaxation, had been transformed into a mission control center. His large computer monitor was split into multiple windows. On one side was the NASA data archive. On the other, his sound editing software, with its complicated graphs of sound waves and a mixer board covered in sliders and knobs. The file he had created, Solar Wind Test, was just the beginning. It was like a rough sketch. Now he wanted to paint the full picture. He went back to the messenger probe data, but this time, he dug deeper. He found more data streams. There was information about the strength of Mercury's magnetic field as it wobbled and shifted. There were detailed counts of different types of particles, electrons, protons, that made up the solar wind. His idea was simple but ambitious. He would give each type of data its own voice. The main solar wind pressure would remain the deep, low whooshing sound, the foundation of the lullaby. Then, he would take the magnetic field data and turn it into a very soft, almost melodic hum that gently rose and fell, like a cello playing a single, slow note far in the distance. Finally, the particle data could become that shimmering, sandy texture that filled the spaces in between. The technical work was slow and demanding. He had to write new, more complex computer programs to translate this data into sound without creating harsh digital clicks or jarring changes. The sound had to remain smooth, seamless, and most importantly, unpredictable to the human ear. It couldn't have a repeating rhythm that the brain could learn and anticipate. It had to be as random and natural as the cosmic event it came from. Hours melted away. He forgot to eat lunch. The sun moved across the sky outside his window, but he barely noticed. He was in what artists and programmers call a flow state, where time seems to disappear, and the only thing that exists is the problem you are solving. Finally, as evening began to paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, he leaned back in his chair. His neck was stiff and his eyes were tired, but a smile played on his lips. He had done it. He had created a new file. He named it Solar Wind Lullaby, Draft 1. This was the moment of truth. The test file had worked, but it was crude. This new version was more complex, more layered. Would it be better? Or had he, in his enthusiasm, ruined the very thing that made it special? The old familiar nighttime anxiety began to whisper in his ear. You tried too hard. You over-engineered it. It's going to sound artificial now. You'll be back to square one. He decided he wouldn't wait for bedtime. He needed to hear it now with a fresh mind. He put on his studio headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. The sound that flowed into his ears was breathtaking. It was undeniably the same cosmic breath as before, but now it had depth and dimension. The deep whoosh was there, steady and reassuring like a planetary heartbeat. But now, weaving through it was that soft, cello-like hum, a gentle rise and fall that felt like being gently rocked. And the shimmering particle static was smoother, now like listening to the soft fizz of a million distant stars. It was still not music. It was an environment. It was the sound of being in a spaceship, parked safely in the calm eye of a cosmic storm, watching the energies of the sun flow peacefully around you. It was both powerful and profoundly gentle. He listened for 10 minutes, completely captivated. This was it. This felt right. Now the wait for nightfall was agonizing, but in a new way. It was the nervous excitement of a performer waiting for the curtain to rise. He ate a simple dinner, his mind still half in the soundscape of Mercury. He cleaned up, his movements automatic. All the while, a part of his brain was already listening to the lullaby, anticipating the peace it promised. Finally, it was time. He went through his normal routine, but everything felt different. Brushing his teeth wasn't just a chore. It was a step towards an experiment. Changing into pajamas wasn't just preparation for another struggle. It was like putting on a uniform for a journey. He got into bed. The room was dark and quiet. He could already hear the faint, annoying buzz of the electronics in his room. His mind, sensing the approach of sleep, began its usual last-minute panic, throwing up random thoughts and worries. But Eris felt a new sense of control. He wasn't a passive victim anymore. He had a tool. He had a shield. He picked up his headphones, connected them to his laptop on the bedside table, and selected the Solar Wind Lullaby Draft 1 file. He took one last look at the faint light from the screen, then closed his eyes and pressed play. The transformation was not instant, but it was swift. The sounds of his room, the buzz, the distant traffic, didn't vanish. Instead, they were slowly absorbed, swallowed whole by the vastness of the cosmic sound. The lullaby didn't block the noise. It made it irrelevant. It placed his small, noisy room inside an immense, quiet universe, making all the little irritations seem tiny and unimportant. His breathing began to slow down, matching the slow, rhythmic pulse of the sound. His heart rate settled. The tension in his jaw, which he almost always carried, released. He felt his body sinking into the mattress, not like a dead weight, but like it was finally being allowed to rest. He thought about the data. He pictured the streams of particles, the invisible magnetic fields, the lonely planet Mercury. But the thoughts were soft and dreamy, not sharp and analytical. They were like thoughts just before a dream, without edges or worries. He didn't fight the feeling. He let it carry him. The deep whoosh was a river, and he was a leaf floating on its surface. The soft hum was a gentle hand on his forehead. The shimmering static was a blanket of stars being pulled over him. He did not know the exact moment he fell asleep. There was no distinct line between being awake and being asleep. It was a smooth, gentle drift from one state to the other. The cosmic lullaby faded from his conscious hearing and became the background of his dreams. When he woke up, the room was filled with bright morning light. He was lying in the same position he had started in, the headphones still on his ears, the laptop screen now dark as the battery had died. He felt clear, like a window that had been washed after years of grime. His body felt light and replenished. He looked at the clock. It was 8:30 a.m. He had slept for almost 8 hours. A deep, powerful emotion welled up inside him, bringing unexpected tears to his eyes. It was more than just relief. It was gratitude. It was a sense of connection to something vast and beautiful. The universe, which often felt cold and empty, had sung him a lullaby, and for the first time in years, he had listened, and he had slept. The world had color again. For Eris, the simple act of waking up feeling rested was like a superpower. The gray fog that had hung over his life for years was gone. The people he passed on the street, the food he ate, the work he did, everything seemed sharper, brighter, and more alive. He found himself smiling for no reason, just because it felt good. This new energy, however, had a sharp, focused point. The Solar Wind Lullaby was no longer just a personal sleep aid. It had become an obsession. He saw its success not as a final solution, but as a thrilling starting point. He had discovered a hidden door, and now he was desperate to see every room that lay behind it. What if the sound from Mercury was just one of many cosmic lullabies? What if the entire solar system was humming with secret, soothing frequencies? His living room, his mission control, became his entire world. He spent less time at his proper studio, telling his partner Lena he was deep in a personal acoustic research project. She was supportive, but a little worried. "You look better, Eris," she'd say on the phone. "But you sound intense." He was intense. He started collecting data like a treasure hunter. He went back to the NASA archives, but now he looked beyond Mercury. He downloaded data from the Voyager probes, which were now in interstellar space, beyond the influence of the sun. He found information from the Parker Solar Probe, a spacecraft that was flying closer to the sun than any human-made object ever had. His plan was simple. He would sonify everything. He would listen to the universe. He started with Jupiter. The giant planet had a monstrous magnetic field, the strongest in our solar system. He was sure it would create something incredible. He spent a full day writing a new program, translating the violent interactions of solar wind with Jupiter's magnetosphere into sound. When he finally played it, the sound that erupted from his headphones was terrifying. It was a roar, a deep groaning, shrieking storm of noise. It sounded like metal being torn apart, mixed with the howl of a hurricane. It was the opposite of calming. It was the sound of cosmic violence. He ripped the headphones off, his heart pounding. Jupiter was not singing a lullaby. It was screaming a war cry. He tried Saturn next. The data from the Cassini probe showed the intricate patterns of its rings and its own strong magnetic field. The resulting sound was more melodic, but in a strange, alien way. There were high whistling notes and a low, droning hum that felt unstable, like it was about to break apart. It was interesting, even beautiful in its complexity, but it didn't bring peace. It brought a feeling of mystery and slight unease. Night after night, he experimented. He tried the gentle solar wind blowing past Mars. He tried the strange tilted magnetic field of Uranus. Each planet, each moon had its own unique voice, but none of them had the magic of Mercury. This confused him at first. Mercury was a scorched, airless, tiny world. Why was it sound so uniquely peaceful? He started reading, not just looking at data. He learned that Mercury, unlike the gas giants, has a very weak magnetic field, just strong enough to gently push and shape the solar wind, but not strong enough to fight it violently. It was like a smooth, round stone in a river. The water, the solar wind, would flow around it smoothly, creating a gentle, consistent whooshing sound. Jupiter, on the other hand, was like a giant dam, and the solar wind crashing into it created a chaotic, roaring waterfall of noise. The beauty of Mercury's lullaby was in its balance. It was a perfect, gentle negotiation between the sun's power and the planet's quiet resistance. This realization hit him like a lightning bolt. It wasn't about finding the most powerful or the most interesting sound. It was about finding the most balanced one, the sound that represented harmony, not conflict. He went back to his Mercury data with a new reverence. He stopped trying to make it more complex. Instead, he started refining it, polishing it. He worked on smoothing out the very slight digital artifacts he could hear with his trained ears. He adjusted the volume balance between the deep whoosh and the shimmering static until it felt perfectly blended, like ingredients in a perfect recipe. He created multiple versions, a 30-minute version, a 1-hour version, an 8-hour version that would last the whole night. He tested each one on himself night after night. He became a connoisseur of his own sleep. He would note the quality of his dreams, how quickly he fell asleep, how he felt in the morning. His life began to revolve around this routine. He would work, eat, and then retreat into his world of cosmic sounds. He stopped seeing friends. He barely left his apartment. The obsession was a hungry thing, and it consumed all his spare time and attention. One evening, his friend Mark called. "Eris, we haven't seen you in ages. A bunch of us are going to see a movie, come on." Eris looked at his computer screen where a new data set was loading. Sorry, Mark, I can't tonight. I'm right in the middle of something." "Again?" Mark said, his voice laced with disappointment. "What is this something? You're not becoming a hermit, are you?" "It's hard to explain," Eris said, his eyes glued to the screen. "It's important." After he hung up, a small pang of guilt hit him. He was pushing people away, but the feeling was quickly drowned out by the excitement of his work. He felt like he was on the verge of something huge, something that could help not just him but countless others who lived in the same white noise prison he had escaped. He wasn't just fixing sleep anymore. He was building the perfect sound, a key to silence, A cure for the noisy modern world. Hidden in the data from a tiny hot planet next to the sun, the universe had given him a gift, and he felt a powerful burning responsibility to understand it completely and share it. The obsession was all-consuming, but for Aris it felt like a purpose. Aris sat in his living room, now more a laboratory than a home, and looked at his creation. On his computer screen was the final version of the solar wind lullaby. He had polished it, smoothed it, and perfected it until he could find no more flaws. To him, it was a masterpiece. It was the gentle breath of Mercury, captured in sound, but a dangerous thought had begun to whisper in his ear, growing louder each day. What if it only works for you? He was a sound engineer. His ears were trained, his mind was wired to analyze noise. Maybe his brain was just uniquely suited to this specific, strange sound. Maybe the peace he felt was just a fancy placebo effect, a trick he was playing on himself because he wanted it to work so badly. The joy of his own restful sleep started to feel fragile, like a beautiful soap bubble that could pop at any moment. If this was all in his head, then he was just a man who had fooled himself, and the white noise prison was still waiting for him, its doors wide open. He couldn't live with that doubt. He needed proof. Not for fame or money, but for his own sanity. He needed to know if the lullaby was real magic or just a clever illusion. This meant he had to test it on other people. The idea made him nervous. Sharing his discovery felt deeply personal, like showing someone a secret diary. This sound had saved him. What if others laughed at it? What if they called it silly or worse, just boring noise? Their rejection would feel like a rejection of his own salvation, but he had to know. So he designed a simple, fair test. He would create 3 different audio tracks. Track A, his perfected solar wind lullaby. Track B, a standard, high-quality white noise track, the kind you could find on any app. Track C, a generic pink noise track, another popular sleep sound that was softer than white noise. He wouldn't tell the listeners what any of the tracks were. He would just label them randomly, X, Y, and Z. He would ask them to listen to one track each night for 3 nights, and then report back on a simple form. How quickly did they fall asleep? How did they feel in the morning? How was the quality of their sleep? Now he needed volunteers. He couldn't ask his friends or family. They would be too kind, or their opinions would be biased because they knew him. He needed strangers, or at least people who didn't care about his feelings. He thought of the online forums he used to visit in his most desperate, sleepless nights. Places where people gathered in the digital dark, all sharing the same misery. He logged into one, his heart beating a little faster. He wrote a post, carefully avoiding any dramatic claims. "Hi everyone," he typed. "I'm a researcher studying sound and sleep. I'm looking for a few people with trouble sleeping to test 3 different audio tracks for 3 nights. It's completely anonymous. If you're interested, please send me a private message." He held his breath and clicked post. He expected nothing. Maybe 1 or 2 people. Within an hour, his inbox was full. Dozens of messages. Reading them was like looking into a mirror from his past. "I haven't had a good night's sleep in 5 years. My mind just won't shut off no matter what I try. I'm so tired I'm starting to forget things. Please, if there's anything that can help." Their words were filled with the same exhaustion and hopelessness he had felt. The weight of their hope suddenly felt heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. Real people were putting their faith in him. He selected 10 people, a mix of men and women of different ages. He emailed them the 3 tracks and the simple form, with instructions not to look at which track was which until after they had filled it out. Then, the waiting began. The next 3 days were some of the longest of his life. He was distracted at work, his mind constantly drifting to his email inbox. He imagined the volunteers listening to his lullaby. He pictured them being unimpressed or annoyed by the sound. He checked his email constantly, his stomach fluttering with nerves every time a new message arrived. The first response came on the morning after the first night. It was from a woman named Sarah. "Track X was okay," she wrote. "Fell asleep in about an hour, which is normal for me. Woke up twice." Aris's heart sank. Track X was the white noise. He felt a strange sense of relief that it wasn't his track, mixed with disappointment that she wasn't helped. Another email came later that day. "Listened to track Z last night," wrote a man named David. "It was weird, but I think I fell asleep a bit faster than usual. Maybe 45 minutes? Hard to say." Track Z was the pink noise. A slight improvement, but nothing amazing. Eris started to feel the cold grip of fear. What if his lullaby did nothing at all? The second day, the report started to change. Another email from Sarah. "Okay, last night I listened to track Y. That was different. I don't know how to describe it. It didn't feel like a sound. It felt more like a feeling. I think I was out in maybe 20 minutes. I only woke up once." Track Y was the solar wind lullaby. Eris's hands trembled as he read the next email. It was from a new volunteer, an older man named Robert. "Listened to track Y last night," Robert wrote. "I've been an insomniac since my army days 40 years ago. I've tried everything. That sound. It's the first thing that ever made my brain feel quiet. I slept for 6 straight hours. I don't remember the last time I did that. What is that sound?" Eris read the words again and again. "My brain felt quiet." That was exactly it. That was the feeling. Over the next 24 hours, the rest of the forms trickled in. When he compiled all the data, the results were clear and stunning. The white noise track, X, had helped 1 person slightly. The pink noise track, Z, had helped 2 people a little bit. But the solar wind lullaby, Y, had significantly improved sleep for 8 out of the 10 volunteers. They reported falling asleep faster, sleeping more deeply, and waking up feeling more refreshed. Their comments were filled with words like peaceful, floating, empty, and calm. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Chloe, summed it up in a way that brought tears to Eris's eyes. "I can't describe it," she wrote. "The other tracks felt like they were trying to cover up the noise in my head. But track Y, it felt like it took my noisy brain and placed it somewhere huge and quiet. I felt safely insignificant, like I was just a small part of something vast and all my worries were too tiny to matter. It was like being rocked in the cradle of the universe." Eris leaned back in his chair, the printed-out forms spread across his desk. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't fooling himself. The lullaby was real. It worked. The fear and doubt that had haunted him vanished, replaced by a wave of emotion so powerful it was overwhelming. It was a mix of triumph, humility, and a profound sense of connection. He had found a key, and it had unlocked a door for others too. He looked out his window at the darkening sky. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly believe it. This wasn't just his personal secret anymore. It was a discovery, and he knew with a certainty that shook him to his core that he had to share it with the world. A feeling of purpose, clean and sharp, now guided Eris's every move. The success of the human test had changed him. He walked taller. The constant, tired slouch in his shoulders was gone. When he looked at people on the street, he didn't just see strangers. He saw potential fellow travelers leaving their own white noise prisons behind. He had the key, and it was his duty to copy it for everyone. He decided to call his discovery the Cosmic Lullaby. He loved the name. It wasn't a product. It was a gift, a natural resource, like sunlight or air, that he had simply learned how to access. His plan was simple and pure. He would build a small, clean website. On it, he would tell his story honestly. He would explain his own struggle with insomnia, his accidental discovery of the NASA data, and the results of his small test. And then, he would offer the Solar Wind Lullaby audio file for anyone to download, for free. No sign-up forms, no payments, no advertisements, just the sound. He worked on the website with the focus of an artist. He chose a dark blue background, like a night sky, with subtle, slowly moving stars. The text was simple and direct, written from the heart. He included a picture of the messenger probe, giving credit to the scientists and engineers who made the discovery possible. He was not the inventor, he wrote. He was the translator. For the first time in months, he felt a healthy balance. He worked on the project with passion, but he also started to live again. He went out for coffee with his friend Mark. "You look like a new man," Mark said, shaking his head in amazement. "What's going on? Did you win the lottery?" Eris smiled. "Something like that. I found something. I think it could really help people. I'm almost ready to show it to everyone." "Help people with what?" Mark asked. "With sleep," Eris said. He didn't go into the cosmic details, worried it would sound too strange. But the confidence in his voice was unmistakable. Even at his proper job, the change was noticeable. Lena commented on it while they were mixing sound for a nature documentary. "Whatever this personal project is, it's good for you," she said, adjusting the level of a babbling brook. "You're lighter." The old grumpy Eris seems to have taken a vacation. "The project is almost done," Eris replied, a thrill going through him as he said it. "I'll show you soon. I think you'll like it." The final step was preparing the audio file itself. He created several versions, a 30-minute version for a quick nap, a 1-hour version, and an 8-hour version for a full night's rest. He made sure the sound quality was perfect, a crystal clear window to the cosmos. The night before he planned to launch the website, he felt a calm excitement. He sat in his living room, the website ready to go live with a single click. He listened to the 8-hour lullaby one last time, not because he needed to sleep, but as a kind of thank you. The deep whoosh filled the room, a sound that had become more familiar and comforting to him than any song. He thought about the journey, from that desperate, hopeless man staring at the ceiling, to this moment, sitting on the edge of sharing a secret that could change thousands of lives. He felt a connection to explorers of the past, looking out at a new horizon. He wasn't just giving people a sound to sleep to, he was giving them a new perspective, a feeling of safe insignificance, a reminder that they were part of a vast, beautiful, and ongoing universe. He went to bed that night feeling a peace deeper than any the lullaby had ever given him. This was it. Tomorrow his life would change. Tomorrow, the cosmic lullaby would belong to the world. He woke up early, full of energy. He made himself a good breakfast, something he never used to have the appetite for. He showered and dressed, treating the day like a holy ceremony. He sat down at his computer, the website open on the screen. The Go Live button was right there. His finger hovered over the mouse. And then, it happened. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced his calm like a needle. It was so sudden and so powerful that he physically flinched. What if it stops working? The thought was followed by a rushing waterfall of others. What if you release it and everyone tries it and it doesn't work for them? What if your test was just a fluke? What if you become a laughingstock? The man who thought space could sing him to sleep? What if you listen to it too much and your brain gets used to it? What if it loses its magic? What if tonight it doesn't work and you're back to lying awake, but now with the whole world knowing you failed? His heart began to hammer against his ribs. The calm excitement evaporated, replaced by a raw, choking anxiety. The beautiful dark blue website on his screen now looked like a cliff he was about to jump off. He couldn't click the button. The fear was too strong. The hope he was feeling for others was suddenly a terrifying risk. If he kept the lullaby to himself, it would always be his secret, his personal cure. It was safe. It was guaranteed. If he shared it, he was risking everything, his peace, his reputation, his own sleep. He stood up from his desk, his hands shaking. He paced around his small apartment. The confident man from yesterday was gone, replaced by the old fearful Eris. He had been so focused on the good he could do for others, he hadn't considered what failure would do to him. The white noise prison wasn't just a memory. Its walls felt close again, and he was about to lock himself back inside by making a foolish public mistake. He looked at the clock. It was 9 a.m. He was supposed to click the button at noon, a symbolic new beginning. He sat back down, his body heavy with dread. The Go Live button seemed to glow, taunting him. The brink of revelation wasn't a beautiful place anymore. It was a terrifying edge, and he was frozen, unable to take the final step, held back by the very same fear that the lullaby had once cured. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was loud, and it was screaming that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The The Go Live button remained unclicked. Noon came and went. The sun moved across the sky, and Eris sat frozen at his desk, trapped in a battle inside his own mind. The beautiful website, his project of hope, now felt like a judge staring back at him. He finally forced himself to stand up, his body stiff. He walked away from the computer, but he couldn't escape the feeling. It was like he had swallowed a heavy, cold stone. The confidence and purpose that had filled him for weeks had drained away, leaving behind a hollow, anxious shell. He tried to go through the motions of his day. He went to the grocery store, but the bright lights and noise of people felt overwhelming. He saw a mother gently rocking a stroller, trying to soothe a crying baby, and his mind snapped to the lullaby. What if it doesn't work for a mother like that? What if she tries it and her baby cries even more? He left the store with only a single loaf of bread, his mission forgotten. That night was the real test, and he was already failing it. As evening fell, the dread grew thicker. His bedtime routine, which had become a comforting ritual, now felt like a walk to the gallows. He was afraid to put on the headphones. He was afraid the magic would be gone. Finally, lying in the dark, he pressed play. The sound began, the deep whoosh, the gentle hum. But this time it was different. His mind, sharpened by fear, didn't relax. It attacked. Instead of hearing a peaceful cosmic breath, he started hearing imperfections, a tiny, almost invisible glitch in the data that he had smoothed over. His brain now amplified it into a loud, repetitive click. The shimmering static, which he had always described as sandy, now sounded harsh and gritty, like radio interference. The smooth, cello-like hum suddenly seemed wobbly and out of tune. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. He turned on the light and grabbed his laptop. He opened the sound file in his editing software, his eyes scanning the visual waveform, the picture of the sound. He zoomed in, looking for the flaw. He found the tiny data spike that caused the click and fixed it in seconds. It was a problem so small that none of his testers had ever noticed it. But to Eris, in his current state, it had been a screaming siren. He lay back down and tried again. The click was gone, but now he was listening too hard, his entire body tense, waiting for the next mistake. He was no longer a person listening to a soothing sound. He was a quality control inspector on a factory line, and the product was failing. The sound that had once made him feel peacefully insignificant now made him feel terrifyingly alone. The vast, dark universe it represented was no longer a gentle cradle. It was a cold, empty vacuum, and this sound was the noise of his own tiny spaceship failing, millions of miles from help. He ripped the headphones off. The silence of his room felt safer than the sound from Mercury. He spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, the familiar ache of exhaustion returning to his bones. The lullaby had not worked. The next day was worse. The lack of sleep made him irritable and paranoid. He went back to his sound files, not with love, but with a desperate, angry energy. He started improving them. He tweaked the equalization, trying to make the whoosh deeper. He adjusted the volume of the particle static, making it louder, then softer, then louder again. He created 10 new versions, each one a frantic attempt to recapture the feeling he had lost. He listened to them one after another, his ears growing tired and sore. But the more he changed it, the worse it sounded. The perfect, natural balance was gone. He was over-seasoning a perfect recipe, and now it was inedible. The sound became artificial, a forced imitation of the real thing. He was trapped in a nightmare loop. He couldn't sleep without the lullaby, but the lullaby no longer worked because he was too anxious to sleep. The very tool he had created to break his anxiety had become its newest source. He stopped answering phone calls from Mark and Lena. Their voices, full of normal life, felt like an accusation. How could he explain that he was falling apart? That the great discovery he had been so proud of was now crumbling in his hands? He looked at the pictures of the volunteers from his test, their thankful words printed out on his desk. Robert, the Army veteran, Sarah, the young mother, Chloe, who felt rocked in the cradle of the universe. He felt like a fraud. Had he somehow tricked them all? Had their belief in him created the effect and not the sound itself? One afternoon, he found himself staring at the NASA data, the columns of numbers that had once seemed so magical. Now they were just that, numbers. Cold, hard, impersonal data. There was no soul in it. There was no lullaby hidden in those digits. He had just imagined it. He had been a lonely, desperate man who had built a castle out of sand, and now the tide of reality was washing it away. He put his head in his hands, surrounded by the glow of his computer screens. The mission control center had become his prison cell. The static wasn't just in the audio files anymore. It was in his mind, a constant crackling panic that drowned out all logical thought. He had been so close to sharing his gift with the world. Now he couldn't even give it to himself. The solar wind lullaby was broken, and he was sure that he was the one who had broken it. The silence he had once found so peaceful was now a void, and he was falling into it with nothing left to hold on to. 3 days passed. Eris was a ghost in his own life. He moved through his apartment like a shadow, his movements slow and heavy. He didn't shave. He ate whatever was easiest, usually just plain bread or cereal, straight from the box. The mess in his living room grew. Empty cups, printouts of sound waves, and scribbled notes covered every surface. He had stopped trying to fix the lullaby. The fight had gone out of him. The crushing disappointment had been replaced by a deep, numb exhaustion. He was back in the white noise prison, but it was worse now because he knew what freedom felt like. He had tasted it, and it had been taken away. On the 4th evening, he found himself standing in the middle of his living room, just staring at nothing. The sun was setting, casting long, sad shadows across the room. He looked at his desk, at the computer that held all his work, all his hopes, all his failures. The screens were dark. He hadn't turned them on all day. A thought, quiet and simple, surfaced through the numbness. I can't do this anymore. It wasn't a thought of giving up on the lullaby. It was a thought of giving up on the fight. The battle to control sleep. The battle to perfect the sound. The battle to prove himself to an imaginary world. He walked away from the desk. He didn't turn on any lights. He let the room be swallowed by the deep blue of twilight. He didn't even try to go to bed. He just lay down on his sofa right there in the living room and stared at the darkening ceiling. He didn't put on headphones. He didn't try to block out the sounds. For the first time in months, he just listened. He heard the refrigerator kick on with its familiar hum. He heard the faint sound of a television from the apartment next door. He heard a dog bark somewhere in the distance. He heard the blood pulsing in his own ears. His mind, as it always did, tried to grab onto these sounds. That hum is too loud. That TV is annoying. When will that dog stop? But instead of fighting the thoughts or feeling angry about them, he just let them be. He acknowledged them like passing clouds. There is the hum. There is the TV. There is the dog. He didn't try to push them away. He just let them exist alongside his own tiredness and sadness. It was a strange feeling. It wasn't peace, but it was a ceasefire. He had stopped throwing punches at the world and at himself. In this quiet state, a memory came to him. It was from his childhood. He was maybe 7 years old, lying in the grass in his grandparents' backyard on a summer night. The air was warm. He could hear crickets and the leaves of a big oak tree rustling in the breeze. He remembered just lying there, not trying to sleep, just looking at the stars. He hadn't been trying to be peaceful. He just was. Sleep had come for him then, naturally, like a gentle tide. He had spent his entire adult life trying to sleep. He had turned it into a problem to be solved, a project to be managed. And with the lullaby, he had created the ultimate management tool. He had tried to engineer peace. He saw his mistake now with heartbreaking clarity. The lullaby hadn't been a tool. When it worked, it had been a teacher. It taught him a feeling, the feeling of being small in a vast, beautiful universe, the feeling of letting go. But he had killed the teacher by trying to put it under a microscope, by demanding that it perform perfectly every single time. The sound from Mercury was never the source of the peace. It was just a reminder, a pointer. It pointed his mind toward a state of acceptance that was already available to him. He thought about the data, the numbers, the perfect waveforms. He had been worshiping the map instead of visiting the country. He had become so obsessed with the recipe that he had forgotten how to taste the food. He sat up on the sofa. The room was now completely dark. He felt a calmness that was different from the forced calm of the lullaby. This calm came from surrender, from admitting he was not in control. He didn't go to his computer. He didn't open his sound software. Instead, he walked to his bedroom. He got into his bed without a plan, without a goal. He thought about the solar wind. He pictured it, not as data, but as a real thing, a silent, invisible river of energy flowing endlessly from the sun. He pictured tiny Mercury, a rocky little ball sitting in that river. It wasn't fighting the solar wind. It wasn't trying to control it. It was just letting the wind flow around it, naturally, effortlessly. That gentle interaction was what created the beautiful whooshing sound. The peace was in the allowing, not in the resisting. He wasn't Mercury, and his thoughts and the noises of the world were the solar wind. He had been trying to build a giant magnetic shield to block it all out. But maybe the answer wasn't to block it. Maybe the answer was to be like Mercury, to let the noise flow around him, to accept its presence without fighting it, and in that acceptance find a natural, gentle peace. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to empty his mind. He just let his thoughts come and go like cars on a distant highway. He didn't try to force sleep. He just rested there in the dark, having let go of the struggle. He wasn't trying to sleep. He was just being, and somewhere in the middle of that gentle acceptance, without any sound at all, sleep came and found him. It wasn't the deep, dramatic crash of the lullaby nights. It was a soft, quiet drifting away. It was natural. It was real. Eris woke up naturally. The sleep hadn't been the deep, knockout kind from the lullaby's best days, but it was real. It was honest. He felt rested, not drugged. The heavy stone of anxiety in his stomach was gone. In its place was a quiet understanding. He got out of bed and walked into his living room. The morning sun illuminated the mess, the scattered papers, the empty cups, the dark computer screens. It didn't fill him with panic or shame anymore. It just was. It was the evidence of a battle that was now over. He made himself a proper breakfast, eggs and toast, and ate it slowly, tasting every bite. He felt like he was rediscovering his own life. The world seemed sharp and clear again, but without the frantic energy of his obsession. After breakfast, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He cleaned. He didn't do it angrily or desperately. He just tidied up, putting things away, washing the cups, gathering the papers into a neat stack. It felt good. It was a physical way of letting go. When the room was clean, he sat at his desk. He looked at the computer. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He turned it on. The screen glowed to life, showing his beautiful, unfinished website for the Cosmic Lullaby. He read his own words from a few weeks ago. They were full of hope and discovery, but he could see now that they were also written from a place of control. He had written like a scientist who had solved a puzzle. He hadn't written like a human being who had learned a lesson. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to abandon the lullaby. It was still a beautiful, helpful thing. But he had to share it with the right intention. Not as a cure, but as a companion. Not as a tool to control sleep, but as a reminder of how to let go. He opened a new document and began to write. He didn't write like a researcher. He wrote like a friend. He told his story simply. He wrote about his years of terrible sleep, the noise in his head, the feeling of hopelessness. He wrote about the accidental discovery of the NASA data and the shock of hearing that strange cosmic sound for the first time. Then he wrote about what he had learned. This was the most important part. "I thought I had invented a sleep machine," he typed, his fingers moving with a calm certainty. "But I was wrong. I was trying to use this sound like a hammer, to smash my insomnia into silence. And for a while it worked. But then it stopped because I was missing the point. The power of this sound isn't in its technical perfection. It's in what it represents. It is the sound of our solar system. It is the sound of the sun breathing onto a tiny planet. When you listen to it, you are not just listening to a noise. You are connecting to something ancient and vast and incredibly peaceful. You are reminding yourself that you are a small part of a huge, beautiful universe. And in that reminder, your own problems, your own worries, the noisy thoughts in your head, they start to feel smaller. They don't disappear, but they lose their power over you. You can let them be, just like Mercury lets the solar wind flow around it. This sound won't cure your insomnia. It won't knock you out like a medicine. Think of it not as a sleeping pill, but as a teacher. It teaches your mind a feeling, the feeling of acceptance. The feeling of letting go. Sometimes you might listen to it and fall asleep quickly. Other times you might just lie there listening, and that's okay too. The goal isn't to be unconscious. The goal is to be at peace whether you are awake or asleep. He finished writing and read it over. It felt true. It felt real. This was the true discovery. It wasn't the sound. It was the perspective. He went back to his website and replaced his old confident text with this new honest story. He kept the dark blue background and the stars. He kept the download links for the 30-minute, 1-hour, and 8-hour versions of the Lullaby, but now he offered them for free with no strings attached. Alongside his new understanding, he also made the audio files open source. He included a link to the original NASA data and a simple explanation of how he sonified it. He invited others to play with it, to create their own versions. He wasn't a gatekeeper of this piece. He was a guide. Finally, he was ready. There was no more fear. There was no more doubt. He knew this was the right way. He clicked the Go Live button. The website was now public. Anyone in the world with an internet connection could read his story and download the Solar Wind Lullaby. He leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel like a revolutionary or a famous inventor. He felt like a man who had planted a small seed in a very big garden. He had no idea if it would grow or what it would become, and that was perfectly okay. He thought about the people who might find it: the tired mother, the stressed student, the retired veteran lying awake at 3 a.m. He wasn't promising them a miracle. He was offering them a friend for the long, dark nights, a reminder that they are not alone in the universe, and that peace can be found not by fighting the noise, but by finding a quieter, larger space inside themselves. Dr. Eris Thorne, the man once called the sleep inventor, had finally discovered that the real invention wasn't a sound from space. It was a new way to listen, to the universe and to himself. And in that discovery, he had found a peace that no white noise machine could ever provide. The days turned into weeks. At first, Eris checked his website's statistics constantly, his heart fluttering every time the visitor count went up by 1. He saw people from all over the world downloading the Lullaby, from cities in Japan, farms in the American Midwest, coastal towns in Portugal. It was a strange feeling, knowing that his personal secret was now whispering in bedrooms across the globe. He braced himself for the emails. He expected criticism, or questions he couldn't answer, or people demanding to know why it didn't work for them. But the emails that trickled into the simple contact form on his website were nothing like that. A woman named Maria from Italy wrote, "I don't know if I sleep more, but I worry less. Listening to this, my fears feel very small. Thank you for this gift." A college student from Canada sent a message. "I use it when I'm studying, not just for sleep. It helps quiet the panic in my head. It makes me feel like my desk is a spaceship and my homework isn't such a big deal." An elderly man from Australia wrote a short note. "It's the sound I didn't know I was waiting for my whole life. It just feels like home." They weren't reporting miracles. They were reporting a shift in perspective, exactly as Eris had hoped. They had understood the true message. They weren't using the Lullaby as a hammer, but as a window. Eris stopped checking the statistics so much. The website was out there doing its work. It didn't need him to watch over it anymore. He had let it go, just like he had let go of the struggle. His own life found a new, gentle rhythm. Some nights he slept deeply and soundly. Other nights, he still lay awake for a while, but the fear was gone. On those wakeful nights, he didn't panic. He didn't feel like a failure. He would just lie there, feeling the softness of his sheets, listening to the quiet sounds of his apartment, and accept that this was just how tonight was going to be. Sometimes he would put on the Lullaby. Other times he wouldn't. He listened to his own needs, not to a rigid rule. He started seeing his friends again. He had dinner with Mark, and he finally explained the whole story: the insomnia, the NASA, data, the obsession, the fear, and finally, the letting go. Mark listened, his eyes wide. "So you're telling me," he said, "that the secret to sleep is to stop trying to sleep?" "Kind of," Eris said with a laugh. "The secret is to stop fighting yourself. The Lullaby just reminds me how." He even told Lena at work. She wasn't surprised at all. "I knew it was something big," she said. "You had that look, the kind you get when you find the perfect sound for a scene. But now you seem lighter. You're not clinging to it anymore." One evening, about a month after the website launched, Eris was sitting in his clean, tidy living room. It was late. The city outside was quiet. He felt a little tired from the day's work, but his mind was still quietly humming, not ready for sleep. He didn't feel stressed. He just felt awake. He smiled to himself. He picked up his headphones, not out of desperation, but out of a sense of companionship. It was like deciding to call an old friend. He selected the 8-hour version of the solar wind lullaby and lay down on his sofa. The sound washed over him. The deep, resonant whoosh of the solar wind. The soft, cello-like hum of Mercury's magnetic field. The gentle shimmer of a billion particles. It was the same sound, but he heard it with new ears. He wasn't analyzing it. He wasn't waiting for it to work. He was just enjoying it. He pictured the messenger probe, a lonely little robot, faithfully collecting data near the sun. He pictured the scientists on Earth who had built it with so much care and hope, never imagining that their numbers would one day become a comfort to so many. He felt a profound connection to the scientists, to the people around the world listening, at that very moment, to the planet Mercury, to the sun itself. He was a small part of a vast interconnected whole. His wakefulness, his sleep, his worries, and his joys were all just tiny notes in a cosmic song that had been playing for billions of years. The sound didn't drag him down into unconsciousness. It lifted him up into a peaceful acceptance. He felt his body relaxing, not because it was forced to, but because it felt safe and secure in this vast universe. He didn't fight the feeling. He drifted with it. His breathing slowed. The line between the sound in his headphones and the quiet darkness of the room began to blur. He was not being knocked out. He was being invited in. Eris Thorne closed his eyes. He was still aware of the gentle, cosmic drift of the sound, but now it felt like it was both outside him and inside him, the rhythm of his own peaceful heart. He was not trying to escape the world. He was simply becoming a part of something larger, something quieter, something infinitely calm. And there, in the gentle cradle of the cosmos, held by the solar winds of a distant star, he slowly, softly, and peacefully drifted off to sleep.